My name is Samantha, and at 34, I never imagined I'd be standing in my bedroom while my in-laws watched me pack with smug expressions. Their lies about me worked better than they hoped. Michael, my husband of 7 years, stood in the doorway, his eyes cold with contempt, believing their fabricated evidence of my infidelity. There's something uniquely devastating about being abandoned by someone who promised to love you forever. What they didn't know was that my grandmother's recent passing left me with more than grief. They'd soon learn what happens when you destroy someone with nothing left to lose. Before I dive into this nightmare, where are you watching from? Hit that like and subscribe button while I finish packing my life into this suitcase. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. Michael and I met 7 years ago at a small bookstore downtown. It was raining heavily, and we both reached for the same dog-eared copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. Our fingers touched, and I felt that cliched spark romance novels always describe. He asked if we could share the book over coffee at the cafe next door. 3 hours later, we were still talking as if we'd known each other our entire lives. Our romance was a whirlwind. Within 3 months, he proposed on the rooftop of his apartment building with fairy lights strung around us and our favorite song playing softly in the background. I said yes without hesitation. That was my first mistake, not taking more time to understand his family dynamics. The red flags appeared during our engagement. His mother Barbara called him multiple times daily. She'd drop by his apartment unannounced, using the key he'd given her for emergencies. When I suggested we set some boundaries, Michael laughed it off, saying, "That's just how mom shows love." His father Thomas was equally concerning but in a different way. A successful businessman who'd built a construction empire from the ground up, he expected absolute loyalty and deference. During our first dinner together, he interrogated me about my family background, my career aspirations, and my 5-year plan as if I were interviewing for a position rather than marrying his son. Our wedding should have been the happiest day of my life, and in many ways, it was. The ceremony was beautiful, held in a garden with cherry blossoms floating through the air. But Barbara found ways to insert herself into every moment. She adjusted my veil right before I walked down the aisle, effectively redoing my hairstylist's work. During her toast, she spoke at length about welcoming me to their family while emphasizing how no one would ever be good enough for her Michael. "I suppose sometimes we need to accept what our children choose," she said with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. The guests laughed uncomfortably, but Michael just squeezed my hand and whispered, "She's just emotional today." After the wedding, we bought a fixer-upper house about 30 minutes from his parents. Michael worked at his family's construction company as the operations manager, while I had a fulfilling career as a paralegal at Wilson & Marks, one of the city's most prestigious law firms. We spent weekends painting walls, installing new floors, and slowly transforming the house into our home. For a while, we were happy. But as the months passed, Barbara and Thomas inserted themselves more aggressively into our lives. Sunday dinners at their house became mandatory. Barbara would call with emergencies that required Michael's immediate attention: a leaky faucet, a weird noise in her car, computer problems that mysteriously resolved themselves once he arrived. During one particularly tense Sunday dinner, Barbara served everyone but made a point to tell me she'd prepared a separate dish for me. "I know how you're always watching your figure, dear," she said, placing a plain chicken breast and steamed vegetables in front of me while everyone else got her famous pot roast with gravy. "I wouldn't want you to feel tempted." I'd never once mentioned dieting to her. When I glanced at Michael, hoping he'd say something, he was busy talking to his father about a new project at work. "Thanks, Barbara," I said, forcing a smile. "How thoughtful." Thomas dominated every conversation with tales of business triumphs and thinly veiled lessons about family loyalty. In business and in life, he would say, locking eyes with Michael, "You keep your true allies close. Blood is what matters in the end." Michael's sister Jessica was there too, seemingly friendly at first. She was married to a banker named Kevin and had the picture-perfect life Barbara clearly wanted for Michael: 2 children, a large home in the right neighborhood, and a wife who dedicated herself to family and social events rather than a career. Samantha has such interesting work stories, Jessica would say, her voice dripping with condescension. It must be so fulfilling to have something to do during the day while you and Michael put off starting a family. As these dinners continued, I noticed a pattern. Michael never contradicted his parents. Even when their comments crossed lines, he'd remain silent or change the subject. In private, when I'd bring up how uncomfortable their behavior made me feel, he'd dismiss my concerns. "They're just old-fashioned," he'd say. "They mean well. You need to try harder to understand them." I began to realize that the charming, confident man I'd fallen in love with transformed into an obedient son the moment his parents entered the room. It was as if invisible strings pulled him back into childhood patterns, and no matter how I tried, I couldn't help him see it. 3 years into our marriage, I started experiencing severe abdominal pain. After several tests, my doctor delivered devastating news. I had a condition that made it nearly impossible for me to conceive naturally. When I told Michael, he held me as I cried, assuring me that we had options: adoption, surrogacy, or even a child-free life filled with travel and experiences. "I married you, Samantha," he said, wiping my tears. "Not your ability to have children." For a few weeks, he was supportive and loving. Then Barbara found out. She cornered me in the kitchen during another Sunday dinner while I was loading the dishwasher. "Michael told us about your condition," she said, lowering her voice as if discussing a shameful secret. "I've been researching some experimental treatments. We can't give up on having real Dawson grandchildren." "We're considering all our options," I replied cautiously. "Including adoption." Barbara's face hardened. "Adoption? That's not the same. There's something special about family bloodlines, Samantha. Surely you understand that." After that conversation, Michael's attitude began to shift. He stopped talking about adoption and started forwarding me articles about experimental fertility treatments. The loving partner who had assured me our marriage was about us, not potential children, was fading away. One evening, I came home early from work and overheard Barbara talking to Michael in our kitchen. I froze in the hallway, out of sight. "I hate to say it, son, but you married the wrong woman," she said softly. "A man like you needs a complete family. Think about what your father built for us, for you. Who will you pass that legacy to now?" I expected Michael to defend me, to remind his mother that a complete family comes in many forms. Instead, there was a long silence. "Maybe the treatments will work," he finally said, his voice small. My heart shattered. I quietly retreated to the front door, opened and closed it loudly, then called out, "I'm home." By the time I entered the kitchen, they were discussing something else entirely, but the damage was done. As the months passed, Michael grew more distant. He worked later, spent more weekends helping his dad at their vacation cabin, and showed less interest in our renovation projects. Meanwhile, Barbara's comments about real family and bloodlines became more frequent and less disguised. Jessica, who had initially seemed like she might become an ally, revealed her true colors at a family barbecue. While the men were outside grilling, she sat beside me on the patio. "It must be so hard," she said, placing her hand on mine. "Knowing you can't give Michael children." "We're working through it," I replied, trying to maintain my composure. "Of course you are," she smiled. "Just know that if things don't work out between you two, we'll always make sure Michael is taken care of." Family supports family through difficult decisions. It wasn't a threat, it was worse. It was a promise that they were waiting in the wings for our marriage to fail. My one source of support during this time was my coworker Natalie. A divorce attorney at our firm, she recognized the signs of my increasingly toxic situation before I could fully admit it to myself. We'd grab lunch together, and I'd find myself sharing more details about my in-laws' behavior. "Sam, what you're describing is emotional abuse," she told me one day over sandwiches. "Not just from his parents, but from Michael too. By allowing this, he's choosing them over you every time." I defended him reflexively. "He's caught in the middle. It's complicated." "It's actually quite simple," she replied. When you marry someone, they become your primary family. Everything else is secondary. Just as things with Michael and his family were deteriorating, I received a call that my grandmother had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. She had raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12, and she was my only real family. The doctors gave her weeks, maybe months. I requested a leave of absence from work to care for her in her final days, moving temporarily to her home 2 states away. Michael seemed almost relieved by my departure. "Take all the time you need," he said, hugging me awkwardly at the airport. "I'll hold down the fort here." During the 6 weeks I spent caring for my grandmother, Michael visited only once, staying just overnight before claiming an emergency at work required his immediate return. He called less frequently as the days passed, and when he did, our conversations were superficial and strained. My grandmother, even in her weakened state, noticed the change. "That boy isn't fighting for you," she said one evening as I checked her medication. "A man who loves a woman properly would be here, supporting you both." I had no response because, deep down, I knew she was right. My grandmother passed away peacefully in her sleep on a Tuesday morning in April. After the funeral and beginning the process of settling her affairs with my cousin James helping as executor, I decided to return home 2 days earlier than planned, hoping to surprise Michael and perhaps reconnect after weeks apart during such a difficult time. I took a taxi from the airport, exhausted from grief and travel. When I unlocked our front door, the house was empty, but signs of recent occupation were everywhere: wine glasses on the coffee table, dishes in the sink, and a faint perfume that wasn't mine lingering in the air. Upstairs in our bedroom, I found it, a small diamond earring on my side of the bed. I didn't own anything like it. I held the glittering piece of evidence in my palm, feeling strangely calm as puzzle pieces clicked into place: the late nights, the weekend work with his father, the emotional distance. I waited. Hours later, Michael came home, startled to find me sitting in the darkened living room. "Sam, you're back early," he said, his voice tight with forced enthusiasm. "Who is she?" I asked, holding up the earring. What happened next still feels surreal when I think about it. Instead of guilt or shame crossing his face, I saw something far worse: cold calculation. "That's rich, coming from you," he said, his voice eerily calm. "I think you need to explain yourself first." "Explain what?" "Don't play innocent," he snapped, pulling out his phone. "While you were gone, I found out everything." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Michael opened it to reveal Barbara, Thomas, and Jessica standing there, as if they'd been waiting for a cue. This had been planned. "Show her," Barbara said, her eyes gleaming with vindictive triumph. Michael pulled up photos on his phone, images of me embracing a man outside my grandmother's house. "Is this your sick grandmother?" he demanded, shoving the phone in my face. "That's my cousin James," I exclaimed, recognizing the photos instantly. "He was helping with the funeral arrangements and the estate." "You met him at our wedding." "Convenient excuse," Thomas interjected. "But it doesn't explain these." He handed me printouts of text messages between Natalie and me, taken completely out of context. Discussions about dealing with difficult in-laws had been twisted to sound like we were covering up an affair. One message from Natalie saying, "He doesn't deserve you after how he's treated you," was highlighted with a note in the margin: "Proof of betrayal." "You went through my private messages?" I asked, incredulous. "I had to know the truth," Michael replied, not a hint of remorse in his voice. "And Jessica found more." Jessica stepped forward, producing an envelope. Inside were bank statements showing withdrawals from our joint account, money I had used to help pay for my grandmother's medical expenses that weren't covered by insurance. "Funding your little escapades," she said with false sympathy. I looked at each of their faces, suddenly understanding with perfect clarity. This wasn't about any genuine belief that I had been unfaithful. This was a coordinated attack, a character assassination designed to justify Michael's own betrayal and to finally remove me from their family. "Where is she?" I asked Michael quietly. "The woman who left her earring in our bed?" His face flushed. Don't try to turn this around on me. I want you to confess and get out of my house. Our house, I corrected him. And I have nothing to confess. Barbara stepped closer, her voice honeyed poison. Samantha, dear, we have all the evidence. Make this easier on yourself. Admit what you've done, sign the papers Michael's lawyer has prepared, and we can all move forward. Papers? I echoed. Thomas produced another envelope. Divorce papers, citing your infidelity. If you sign now and waive all claims to marital assets, we won't have to make this public and embarrass you further. It was a setup. They had orchestrated everything, the fake evidence, the ambush, the divorce papers already prepared. How long had they been planning this? Get out, Michael said, his voice cold. You have 30 minutes to pack essentials. The rest of your things will be dealt with by our lawyers. In a daze, I packed a suitcase while they watched, Barbara supervising to make sure I didn't take anything valuable, Thomas making business calls as if this were just another day, Jessica documenting what I took with her phone camera for the record, and Michael standing silently in the doorway, a stranger wearing my husband's face. As I wheeled my suitcase to the door, the skies opened up in a downpour. No one offered to drive me anywhere. No one asked where I would go. I ordered a rideshare on my phone and stood under the small overhang of our porch, watching the rain wash away the life I thought I had. We know what you really are, Barbara said as she closed the door. And now Michael does too. Natalie took me in without hesitation. Her spare bedroom became my refuge as I tried to process the calculated cruelty of what had happened. For the first week, I barely left the room, cycling through grief, rage, and numbness. You need to eat something, Natalie said, bringing me soup on the 7th day of my self-imposed isolation. And then we need to talk about what happens next. There is no next, I mumbled. They won. They finally got what they wanted. This isn't about winning or losing, she replied firmly. This is about justice, and you deserve it. The divorce papers arrived by courier the next day. They cited irreconcilable differences and adultery as grounds, demanding I forfeit all claims to our house, vehicles, and joint investments due to my marital misconduct. A separate letter from Thomas's attorney warned that if I contested anything, they would be forced to make the evidence of my infidelity public, potentially damaging my professional reputation. The final blow came when I tried to withdraw money from my personal account. Michael had emptied our joint accounts, expected. But he had somehow gained access to my personal account as well, leaving me with $142.37 to my name. The humiliation of having to borrow money from Natalie for basic necessities crushed what little spirit I had left. I'd gone from a successful professional with a beautiful home and loving husband to homeless, nearly penniless, and branded an adulteress in less than 2 weeks. You need a lawyer, Natalie insisted over dinner that evening. I can't afford one, I reminded her bitterly. And the family law attorneys at our firm can't represent me due to conflict of interest policies since I work there. I know someone, she said, pulling out her phone. Brandon Walsh. We went to law school together. He specializes in high-conflict divorces, and he owes me a favor. Brandon agreed to meet us the next day. A tall man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, he listened without interruption as I detailed the ambush, the fabricated evidence, and the financial situation. They've been planning this for a long time, he observed when I finished. The coordination, the prepared documents, the financial moves. This isn't impulsive. Can you help me? I asked. I can't pay you right now, but once I get back on my feet. I'll take the case pro bono, he cut in. What they've done isn't just morally reprehensible, much of it is legally actionable. Financial fraud, possible computer crimes in accessing your private messages, fabricating evidence. For the first time since being thrown out, I felt a flicker of hope. That flicker burst into flame the following day when I received a call from my grandmother's attorney. I'd been so consumed by the divorce crisis that I hadn't followed up after the funeral. Ms. Reynolds, we need to schedule a meeting regarding your grandmother's estate, the attorney said. There are significant matters to discuss. I assumed it would be about selling her modest house and personal effects. I was unprepared for what awaited me in the attorney's office. Your grandmother was quite a savvy investor, Mr. Parker explained, sliding a folder across his desk. Over the decades, she built a substantial portfolio, focusing particularly on construction and development companies in your region. I opened the folder and stared at the figures, unable to comprehend the numbers. This can't be right, I whispered. I assure you, it is, he replied with a small smile. Your grandmother left you approximately $4.2 million in liquid assets, real estate, and stock holdings. Most notably, she was a significant shareholder in Westridge Development Corporation. The name hit me like a physical blow. Westridge was the largest competitor to Dawson Construction, Michael's family business. There's more, Mr. Parker continued, retrieving an envelope from his desk. She left this letter for you. With trembling hands, I opened it and read. My dearest Samantha *. If you're reading this, I've moved on to whatever adventure comes next. Don't grieve too long, I've had a full life and am ready for rest *. You might be surprised by what I'm leaving you. I've always been more than just a retired schoolteacher, though that's all most people saw. My late husband taught me about investing, and I discovered I had quite a talent for it *. I never told you my concerns about Michael and his family because you seemed happy, and I wanted that for you above all else. But I'd been watching and listening over the years. I never trusted them, too much hunger for control in their eyes *. I've structured this inheritance to protect you. The Dawsons can't touch it, even if you're still married when I pass. If they've shown their true colors by now, as I suspect they might, use these resources wisely. Remember what I always told you, the best revenge isn't served cold, it's served smart *. All my love *. Grandma Eleanor *. Tears streamed down my face. Not just for the incredible generosity, but for my grandmother's foresight and wisdom. She had seen what I couldn't and had prepared a safety net I never knew I needed. When I showed the letter and documents to Brandon, his professional composure cracked into a wide grin. Your grandmother, he said with admiration, was a tactical genius. This changes everything. Over the next few days, a plan formed. Rather than merely defending against Michael and his family's accusations, we would mount a counteroffensive, methodically exposing their lies while building a case for financial fraud and marital asset dissipation. Brandon's team began investigating the Dawson Construction Company's finances, discovering concerning patterns of fund misappropriation and potential tax issues. The business that Thomas Dawson had presented as a thriving empire showed signs of serious financial strain beneath its glossy exterior. They're leveraged to the eyeballs, Brandon explained, showing me the analysis. Multiple loans, missed payments disguised by creative accounting, and a reputation in the industry that's nowhere near as sterling as they pretend. For the first time since being kicked out in the rain, I felt a surge of strength. My grandmother had given me more than financial security, she'd given me the power to fight back against people who thought they could discard me without consequences. What's our next move? I asked Brandon, a new determination in my voice. We gather more evidence, build an airtight case, and then, he smiled, we show them exactly who they're dealing with. With resources now at my disposal, I rented a small apartment and began rebuilding my life while strategizing with Brandon. Our first priority was dismantling the false narrative of my infidelity. I contacted my cousin James, explaining the situation and how his photos with me had been weaponized. They're using our hug at Grandma's funeral as evidence I was cheating? He asked, incredulous. That's sick, Sam. James, a digital forensics expert who worked for a cybersecurity firm, offered to analyze the photos Jessica had manipulated. Give me a few days, he said. If they've been doctored or taken out of context, I'll find the proof. Meanwhile, Natalie gathered affidavits from our coworkers confirming my whereabouts and character, establishing an alibi that contradicted the Dawsons' timeline of my supposed affair. Brandon assigned a private investigator to look into Michael's activities over the past 6 months. Within a week, We had credit card statements showing regular charges at an upscale hotel across town during times Michael claimed to be working late, along with receipts for jewelry, including a pair of diamond earrings, that I'd never received. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Our former house cleaner, Maria, contacted me after hearing about the divorce from a mutual acquaintance. "Mrs. Reynolds, I did not feel right staying silent," she said when we met at a cafe. "Mr. Reynolds had women at the house while you were away." "I saw them." "Women? More than one?" I asked, stomach churning. Maria nodded uncomfortably. "A blonde woman several times. And another with red hair, just once." She agreed to provide a sworn statement, adding another piece to our growing case. Through social media sleuthing, James identified the blonde woman as Amber Wilson, a new administrative assistant at Dawson Construction. Brandon's investigator confirmed she'd been hired 3 months before my grandmother fell ill. I decided to confront her directly, arranging to accidentally run into her at the coffee shop near the Dawson offices. When I approached her table and introduced myself, her face drained of color. "I don't want any trouble," she said immediately, looking around as if for escape routes. "I just want the truth," I replied, sliding into the seat across from her. "How long were you seeing my husband?" After initial denials, Amber's resolve crumbled. "He told me you were separated," she admitted. "That you were living with another man and had abandoned him. I would never have gotten involved if I'd known he was lying." "Did his family know about your relationship?" Her bitter laugh told me everything. "His mother introduced us. Said Michael needed support during a difficult time." The pieces were falling into place. Michael's affair with Amber wasn't just some spontaneous indiscretion. It was part of the Dawsons' orchestrated plan to replace me with someone more malleable, someone Barbara approved of. Amber agreed to testify about their relationship, motivated partly by guilt and partly by anger at being manipulated herself. "They used me too," she said before we parted. "I want them to face consequences." Our case grew stronger by the day. James found digital evidence that the supposedly incriminating texts between Natalie and me had been selectively edited, with critical context removed. He also traced the document creation metadata on the evidence file to Jessica's personal laptop. "They weren't even smart about covering their tracks," James reported. "The files still have Jessica's username embedded in the metadata, and the timestamps show they were created weeks before they claimed to have discovered your infidelity." As we built our legal strategy, I had an unexpected encounter at the grocery store with Barbara. She was examining tomatoes when I turned the corner into the produce section. For a moment, we both froze. "Well," she said, recovering quickly, "I'm surprised you're still in town. I thought you'd have slunk away by now." "I'm not going anywhere, Barbara," I replied calmly, selecting an avocado without looking at her. Her face hardened. "You'll never win against us, you know. We own this town. Michael's already moved on." I met her gaze directly. "We'll see about that." Something in my demeanor must have unsettled her because she abandoned her shopping cart and left without another word. The next development caught us all by surprise. Jessica reached out through a burner email, requesting a private meeting. "I want to switch sides," she wrote. "I have information you need." Brandon was immediately suspicious. "This reeks of a setup. They're probably trying to entrap you into saying something they can use against you." I agreed. Jessica has never done anything that didn't directly benefit Jessica. Let's proceed carefully. We arranged a meeting at a public restaurant, with James sitting at a nearby table, ready to intervene if necessary. Jessica arrived looking nervous, constantly checking her phone. "I want immunity," she said without preamble. "If I help you, I want guarantees that I won't face legal consequences." "That depends on what you're offering and your level of involvement in the fraud," Brandon replied coolly. Jessica hesitated, then leaned forward. "You should know, you're not the first. They've done this before." "Done what?" I asked. "This whole routine. The setup, the accusations, the ambush." She glanced around nervously. Michael was engaged before you. To a woman named Diane Mercer. They did the same thing to her when she started questioning Thomas about company finances. This was potentially valuable information, but we needed to verify it independently. Given Jessica's history of deception, we couldn't take her word at face value. I'll need to record this conversation, I said, placing my phone on the table. Jessica's hand shot out to cover it. No recordings, she hissed. Nothing that can be traced back to me. The theatrical nervousness, the convenient story, the refusal to be recorded, all red flags. Why are you really here, Jessica? I asked directly. She faltered, then regained composure. I told you, I want to help. Michael's treating me differently now, siding with Dad on decisions that affect my position in the company. I'm looking out for myself. James, who had been monitoring the conversation from nearby, texted Brandon, she's wearing a wire. Saw her adjusting it under her collar. Brandon showed me the text discreetly, and we implemented our contingency plan. Let's continue this conversation somewhere more private, I suggested. In a nearby hotel conference room we'd booked in advance, James scanned Jessica for recording devices, confirming our suspicions. Confronted with evidence of her deception, Jessica broke character. Fine, she snapped. Yes, they sent me to try to get you to admit to something incriminating. They're getting desperate because your lawyer's investigation is making waves. What Jessica didn't realize was that while we had prevented her from recording us, we had legally recorded her confession to the setup. Another piece of evidence showing the Dawsons' coordinated campaign against me. Despite the attempted trap, Jessica's mention of Diane Mercer gave us a new lead. Through careful research, Brandon located her in a city about 200 miles away. After a background check confirmed her identity and previous connection to Michael, I reached out with a carefully worded email explaining my situation. Her response came within hours. I'd been waiting for this call for years. When can we meet? 2 days later, Diane sat across from Brandon and me in his office, her expression a mixture of vindication and lingering pain. I was engaged to Michael for 11 months, she began. Everything was perfect until I overheard Thomas discussing some questionable business practices. When I asked Michael about it, he dismissed my concerns, but things changed after that. Barbara suddenly had issues with our wedding plans. Thomas started questioning my loyalty to the family. Her story mirrored mine with eerie similarity, the staged evidence of infidelity, the family ambush, the immediate pressure to walk away quietly. The only difference was that without financial resources or legal support, Diane had been forced to accept their terms. They took everything from me, my reputation, my savings, even my career. Their rumors followed me, and I had to move away to start over, she said, tears welling in her eyes. I always knew someday another woman would go through the same thing. I'm just sorry it was you, Samantha. Diane agreed to provide a sworn affidavit detailing her experience, creating a devastating pattern of evidence showing the Dawsons' modus operandi. With each new piece of information, our case strengthened, and the true nature of the family I had married into became clearer. They weren't just controlling and manipulative, they were predatory, willing to destroy anyone who threatened their facade of perfection or questioned their authority. And now, armed with the truth, resources, and growing evidence, I was becoming their worst nightmare, a victim who could fight back. The first divorce hearing was scheduled 6 weeks after I'd been thrown out of my home. Brandon had advised filing a countersuit rather than simply responding to Michael's petition, formally accusing him of adultery, financial fraud, and malicious character defamation. When we walked into the courtroom, the shock on the Dawsons' faces at seeing my professional legal team was worth every penny of my grandmother's inheritance. They had expected me to appear alone, broken, and unprepared. Instead, they faced Brandon and 2 associate attorneys, all carrying briefcases bulging with evidence. Michael's lawyer, a longtime friend of Thomas's, approached Brandon before the proceedings. We should talk settlement, he offered casually. My client is willing to be generous despite the circumstances. Brandon smiled thinly. We'll pass. Mrs. Reynolds is quite looking forward to presenting her evidence to the court. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, quickly sensed the unusual dynamics of the case. As Michael's attorney presented their claims of my infidelity, she interrupted several times to request supporting evidence beyond the edited photos and texts. "Your Honor," Brandon said when our turn came, before addressing the plaintiff's baseless allegations, "we would like to present evidence of a coordinated conspiracy against my client, including documented adultery by Mr. Reynolds, financial fraud, and a pattern of similar behavior against a previous fiancé." He methodically presented our evidence: the digital forensics report proving the manipulation of texts and photos, Maria's testimony about Michael's visitors to our home, Amber's affidavit admitting to the affair, and the financial records showing Michael had systematically drained accounts as my grandmother's health declined. Furthermore, Brandon continued, "we have testimony from Ms. Diane Mercer, Mr. Reynolds' former fiancée, establishing a pattern of nearly identical tactics used against her when she raised concerns about family business practices." The judge's expression grew increasingly stern as the evidence mounted. By the time Brandon finished his initial presentation, Michael was ashen-faced, and Thomas was furiously whispering to their attorney. In light of the serious allegations and compelling preliminary evidence, the judge announced, "I am issuing a temporary injunction freezing all marital assets and business accounts pending further investigation. Additionally, Mr. Reynolds is to vacate the marital home within 48 hours, returning it to Mrs. Reynolds' possession during these proceedings." It was a stunning preliminary victory. As we left the courtroom, I caught Barbara's venomous glare and Thomas's stunned expression. They had never imagined their carefully constructed plan could unravel so dramatically. That evening, as I was reviewing documents with Brandon at his office, his assistant interrupted to say Michael was in the lobby, requesting to speak with me alone. "Absolutely not," Brandon said immediately. "I want to hear what he has to say," I decided after a moment. "But in your conference room, with you next door." Michael looked different, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes and a nervousness I'd never seen in him before. He sat across from me, hands fidgeting on the table. "Sam," he began, his voice hoarse, "I don't know what to believe anymore." "That's rich, coming from you," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the emotional turmoil of seeing him. "The evidence your lawyer presented, some of it has to be fabricated." "My parents wouldn't do that." "Jessica wouldn't." "Just like the evidence against me was fabricated?" I asked. "You were willing to believe the worst about me without a second thought, Michael. You didn't even question it." He ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under. Dad's business is struggling. The merger with Eastlake fell through. They needed me to be focused, committed to the family. And I was what? A distraction? An inconvenience? Someone to discard when I no longer fit your family's plans? No. I loved you, Sam. He stopped, seemingly surprised by his own words. Things got so complicated. When you left to care for your grandmother, Dad started saying you were abandoning the family during a crisis. Mom kept finding evidence that you were living a double life. And you believed them without question, I said, the hurt still raw. You threw away 7 years of marriage because Mommy and Daddy told you to. He looked down at his hands. I've started seeing a therapist. He says I have dependency issues with my parents. That I've never established proper boundaries. The confession surprised me. Michael had always ridiculed therapy as paying strangers to listen to your problems. I'm starting to question everything, he continued. The business practices, the way they control everyone around them, what really happened with Diane. You remember Diane? I asked sharply. He nodded slowly. I convinced myself she was the villain my parents painted her as. Now I'm not so sure about anything. What do you want, Michael? Forgiveness, he said quietly. A second chance. I'll stand up to them this time, I promise. We could start over, go to counseling, maybe move away from here. For a brief moment, I felt the pull of what might have been, the future we had planned together, the love I'd once believed was unshakable. But then I remembered standing in the rain with one suitcase, Michael watching coldly from the doorway as his family orchestrated my humiliation. "No," I said firmly. "What we had is broken beyond repair. I could never trust you again, and without trust, there's nothing worth saving. Sam, please. You chose your family over me when it mattered most," I continued. "You were willing to destroy me to please them. That's not love, Michael. That's cowardice." His eyes filled with tears. "What happens now?" "Now we continue with the divorce. My terms are simple: I keep the house, my retirement accounts remain untouched, and I want half the value of our joint investments as of the date you emptied the accounts." "And if I agree?" "Then we can avoid dragging this out in court, exposing more of your family's manipulation and your affair." He left looking defeated, a shadow of the confident man I had married. Despite everything, I felt a pang of sadness for him, still trapped in his parents' web even as he began to recognize its toxic nature. The settlement negotiations proceeded quickly after that. Michael agreed to my terms against his parents' vehement objections. The final divorce papers were ready for signing within weeks. On the day the divorce was finalized, I sat across from Michael in the judge's chambers, both of us silent as our attorneys handled the formal proceedings. When the judge declared our marriage dissolved, Michael finally spoke directly to me. "I'm sorry, Sam. For everything." His voice broke. "I should have been stronger." "Yes," I agreed simply. "You should have been." As I walked out of the courthouse a legally single woman, I saw Barbara and Thomas waiting by their car. Michael approached them, his shoulders slumped. Even from a distance, I could see Thomas berating him while Barbara clutched his arm possessively. In that moment, despite everything, I felt a fleeting sympathy for Michael. He would never truly be free as long as he remained under their control. But that was no longer my battle to fight. I had my own life to rebuild, stronger and wiser than before. While my personal divorce was settled, the broader legal confrontation with the Dawson family was just beginning. The evidence we had uncovered during the divorce proceedings had triggered investigations into Dawson Construction's business practices, tax filings, and financial disclosures. Brandon assembled a specialized team including a forensic accountant and a corporate fraud investigator to build a comprehensive case. What they uncovered was staggering: years of tax evasion, misappropriation of client funds, falsified bids on government contracts, and systematic wage theft from employees. "This goes beyond family dysfunction," Brandon explained as we reviewed the findings. "Thomas Dawson has been running a criminal enterprise disguised as a legitimate business for decades." We debated how to proceed. Part of me wanted to hand everything over to prosecutors immediately, but Brandon advised a more strategic approach. "Criminal cases can drag on for years," he cautioned. "And the Dawsons have political connections that might shield them. I suggest we pursue civil action first, using the threat of criminal exposure as leverage." We filed a civil RICO suit against Dawson Construction, Thomas, and key executives, alleging a pattern of fraud and corruption. The complaint was sealed pending initial review, giving us time to prepare for the inevitable counterattack. The dramatic courtroom confrontation exceeded even my expectations. Thomas, accustomed to intimidating opponents into submission, was visibly shocked by the volume and specificity of evidence against him. As Brandon methodically presented financial records, witness testimonies, and internal documents provided by whistleblowers, Thomas's composed facade crumbled. "This is absurd," he finally exploded, rising from his seat. "These are baseless accusations from a vindictive ex-daughter-in-law. She's trying to destroy our family because my son had the sense to divorce her." The judge, unimpressed by the outburst, warned Thomas to control himself or be held in contempt. Barbara, seated behind her husband, maintained her icy composure until Brandon introduced evidence of her direct involvement in financial improprieties. Specifically, documentation showing she had diverted company funds to personal accounts and manipulated bookkeeping records. Mrs. Dawson wasn't just a passive beneficiary of the fraud, Brandon explained. She was an active participant, particularly in concealing assets to evade taxation. At this accusation, Barbara's veneer shattered. "You ungrateful little nobody," she shrieked, pointing at me. "We welcomed you into our family. We gave you everything. And this is how you repay us?" As security escorted her from the courtroom, the judge ordered a recess. In the hallway, I encountered Michael, who had been subpoenaed to testify but hadn't yet been called. "Did you know?" he asked quietly. "About their business practices?" "I suspected something wasn't right," I admitted. "But I never imagined the scale." He nodded, looking older than his years. "I knew. Not everything, but enough that I should have done something. I told myself it was just aggressive business strategy, not actual fraud." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm going to testify against them," he said, resolve strengthening his voice. "I've been compiling my own evidence for months. The therapist helped me see that I need to break free, even if it means they go to prison." His testimony proved devastating to his parents' defense. Michael methodically detailed years of fraudulent practices he had witnessed or participated in, often under direct pressure from Thomas. He provided dates, amounts, and names of clients and officials who had been deceived or bribed. The most damning moment came when Michael described a meeting where Thomas and Barbara had explicitly planned my removal from the family. They decided Sam was becoming a liability because she asked too many questions about company finances, he testified. My mother suggested finding evidence of infidelity as the cleanest way to justify a divorce without risking exposure. When asked why he had participated in this scheme, Michael's answer was painfully honest: "Because I was a coward who feared my parents more than I loved my wife. It's the greatest regret of my life." By the end of the proceedings, the judge issued a preliminary ruling freezing all Dawson Construction assets pending final judgment, and referred the evidence to federal prosecutors for potential criminal charges. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered as Thomas and Barbara were escorted to their car, faces rigid with fury and humiliation. I avoided the press, slipping out a side entrance with Brandon. "It's not over," he warned as we drove away. "They'll appeal, fight every step of the way. The Dawsons won't go down without exhausting every option." "I know," I replied, watching the courthouse recede in the side mirror. "But they've lost the advantage of secrecy and intimidation. Everything is in the open now." The legal battle continued for months, with motions, counter-motions, and settlement offers that we systematically rejected. Throughout this period, I focused on rebuilding my life, returning to work at the law firm, renovating my house to erase memories of my marriage, and carefully managing the investment portfolio my grandmother had left me. Michael reached out occasionally, usually with new information for our legal team. He had moved into a small apartment and severed most ties with his parents, though Jessica maintained contact, caught between loyalty to her parents and fear of legal consequences. The final settlement negotiations took place in a marathon 14-hour mediation session. The Dawsons, facing imminent criminal indictments and civil penalties that would bankrupt them, finally accepted terms that included substantial financial restitution, dissolution of certain business entities, and a governance overhaul of any remaining companies. When the final documents were signed, Thomas, now visibly aged and diminished, approached me directly for the first time since the divorce. "You've destroyed my life's work," he said, voice heavy with defeat and residual anger. "I hope that brings you satisfaction." "This wasn't about satisfaction, Thomas," I replied calmly. "It was about justice, not just for me, but for everyone your family has hurt over the years." Barbara, overhearing, joined her husband. "We made you. Without the Dawson name, you would still be nobody." I smiled slightly. "I was someone long before I met your son, Barbara. Someone my grandmother believed in enough to prepare for this exact scenario. She saw through you from the beginning." As they turned to leave, I felt no triumph, no vindication, only relief that this chapter of my life was finally closing. The Dawsons would face consequences for their actions, and I would move forward, wiser and stronger for having survived them. 6 months after the settlement, I stood in what was now truly my house, surveying the completed renovations. Gone were the dark wood paneling and heavy furniture Thomas and Barbara had insisted upon when Michael and I first moved in. Now the space was filled with light, large windows uncovered, walls painted in soft blues and greens, furniture chosen for comfort rather than status. With Brandon's encouragement, I had started my own legal consulting business, specializing in helping women navigate high-conflict divorces involving financial abuse. My experience and the connections I'd made throughout my own case provided a foundation for work that felt meaningful and healing. I'd also established a scholarship fund for domestic abuse survivors using part of my inheritance, naming it after my grandmother. The first 3 recipients had already begun their education programs, moving toward financial independence. Life had settled into a new normal that, while different from what I'd once planned, brought its own satisfaction. I was having breakfast at my favorite cafe when I looked up to see Michael standing by my table, uncertainty in his expression. "Sam," he said. "I thought that was you. Do you mind if I join you for a moment?" I gestured to the empty chair across from me. He sat, looking markedly different from the man I'd been married to, thinner, with a trimmed beard and casual clothes instead of the tailored suits his parents had insisted upon. But the most noticeable change was in his eyes, clearer, more present. "You look well," I offered, meaning it. "Thanks. I'm getting there. The therapy helps. Twice weekly sessions for the past year." "I'm glad," I said sincerely. "How are things otherwise?" He gave a rueful smile. "Complicated. I'm working for Westridge now, entry-level project management. Starting over completely." I raised an eyebrow. "My grandmother's company? Ironic, right? They hired me despite everything, or maybe because of it. My knowledge of Dawson Construction's operations has been valuable for them." "And your parents?" His expression darkened. "Dad took a plea deal. 5 years, eligible for parole in 3. Mom got probation and community service. The business is essentially defunct. They had to sell most of their assets to cover the settlements and legal fees." "Jessica?" "Immunity in exchange for testimony. She's moved to Arizona, trying to start fresh." He paused, fidgeting with a napkin. "They still blame you for everything, you know. In their minds, you're the villain who destroyed the family legacy." "I'm not surprised," I replied. "People like your parents never take responsibility for their actions." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared history settling between us. "I wanted to thank you," he finally said. "For what?" "For not hating me, even though you had every right to. For showing me what real strength looks like." He met my eyes directly. "You helped me find the courage to break free from them, even if that wasn't your intention." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it apologetically. "I have to go, therapy appointment." As he stood to leave, he hesitated. "I know we can never go back, and I'm not asking for that. But I hope someday, maybe, we could be something like friends." "Maybe someday," I replied, not committing but not rejecting the possibility either. "Take care of yourself, Michael." 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected invitation to speak at a business ethics conference. The organizer mentioned that my case study on corporate family dynamics and fraud had become a teaching tool at several business schools. I accepted, finding unexpected fulfillment in transforming my painful experience into educational material that might prevent similar situations. After my presentation, a familiar couple approached, Barbara and Thomas Dawson. Thomas looked diminished in casual clothes, awaiting his incarceration date. Barbara's designer wardrobe had been replaced by simple, practical attire, her jewelry noticeably absent. "You've turned the whole town against us," Barbara hissed, her voice low to avoid attracting attention. "Decades of relationships, business connections, social standing, all destroyed because you couldn't accept your place." "My place?" I repeated. "As what? A convenient accessory to be discarded when I became inconvenient." Thomas stepped forward. "We built something that would have lasted generations. now it's gone. Our reputation ruined, our son turned against us. I hope you're satisfied with your revenge. I studied them both, seeing clearly the insecurity and fear beneath their anger. They truly couldn't comprehend that this wasn't about revenge, it was about justice and self-preservation. This was never about destroying you, I said calmly. It was about surviving what you tried to do to me. Everything that's happened since was the natural consequence of your own actions. Easy to say when you're standing on the ruins of our lives, Barbara snapped. Actually, I replied, reaching into my bag for documents I'd received that morning, I have something you should know. Westridge Development merged with Global Construction last week. The deal was finalized yesterday. Thomas's face paled. What does that have to do with us? My grandmother's shares in Westridge gave me significant input in the merger negotiations. As part of the deal, I now hold a controlling interest in the parent company that will be restructuring what remains of Dawson Construction. The shock on their faces was palpable as they realized the implications. You're saying, Thomas began. That technically, I'm now your boss, I confirmed. The board has appointed me to oversee the reorganization of all subsidiary companies, including what's left of yours. Barbara swayed slightly, gripping Thomas's arm for support. This isn't revenge, I continued. It's business. Unlike you, I intend to run things ethically and transparently. The employees who remained loyal despite your mismanagement deserve that much. As they stood speechless, I gathered my belongings. I have a meeting to get to. I suggest you both focus on rebuilding your own lives rather than blaming me for the consequences of your choices. Walking away, I felt no joy in their devastation, only closure. The karmic symmetry wasn't lost on me. The family that had conspired to strip me of everything now found themselves under my professional authority. The following weekend, I visited my grandmother's grave, placing fresh flowers beside her headstone. The autumn air was crisp, leaves crunching beneath my feet as I stood in peaceful reflection. You were right, Grandma, I said softly. The best revenge isn't served cold, it's served smart. I thought about the journey of the past 18 months, from happily married to homeless in the rain, from victim to victor. The path had been painful, but I'd emerged stronger, wiser, and surprisingly, more compassionate. In the end, this story wasn't really about the Dawsons or even about revenge. It was about discovering my own resilience, about building a new future on my own terms after everything I thought I knew had been stripped away. As I turned to leave, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The chapter with the Dawsons was finally closing, and ahead lay a future entirely of my own making. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have fought back like I did, or tried to find another way? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this true story of resilience and justice, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more incredible real-life experiences. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, sometimes when people think they've defeated you, they've actually just awakened your true power.